The morning sun rose harsh and unforgiving over the town of Dry Creek, painting the weathered buildings in shades of rust and gold. Dust devils danced between the scattered structures, carrying with them the promise of another scorching day in this forgotten corner of the American frontier. The year was 1873, and the West was as wild as the hearts of those brave enough to call it home. Clara Morrison stood on the porch of her modest homestead, her slender frame wrapped in a faded blue dress that had seen better days. At 23, she was already a widow. Her husband Thomas lost to a rock slide while working the copper mines near the border just 8 months prior. The wedding ring on her finger caught the light as she shaded her eyes, surveying the land that was now hers alone to tend. The property wasn't much to look at. 40 acres of stubborn earth that yielded more rocks than crops, with a small herd of cattle that seemed perpetually on the verge of wandering off in search of better grazing. But it was hers, passed down through Thomas's family, and now resting squarely on her young shoulders. The burden of it pressed down like the heat itself, relentless and suffocating. In town, whispers followed Clara like tumbleweeds. Women clutched their shawls tighter when she passed, their eyes darting between pity and something sharper, perhaps envy that she owned land while they owned only the clothes on their backs, or perhaps disdain for a woman who dared to hold property in her own name. The men were worse, their gazes lingering too long, calculating what it might take to separate her from those 40 acres. That Morrison widow won't last the season. Old Jake Patterson had declared just yesterday at Murphy's General Store, spitting tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. Land like that needs a man's hand. She'd do better to sell now while she can still get a fair price. Clara had been standing right there, purchasing flour and salt, her jaw set tight as granite. She'd paid for her goods without a word, but her hands had trembled as she loaded the supplies into her wagon. It was on this particular morning, as Clara contemplated the fence that needed mending before the cattle found yet another escape route, that she first saw him. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, his silhouette dark against the brightening sky. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent more nights under stars than roof, his horse responding to the slightest shift of weight as if they were one creature. The stranger rode past her property line without slowing, but Clara noticed how his head turned, how his eyes, even from a distance, seemed to take measure of her land. Something cold settled in her stomach. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of the banker who'd tried to convince her to take a loan she couldn't afford, in the face of the rancher from the next county who'd offered to help her manage the property. The rider continued toward town, and Clara forced herself to return to her chores. There was washing to be done, chickens to feed, and that cursed fence wasn't going to fix itself. Yet, throughout the morning, her thoughts kept drifting to the stranger, to the way he'd sat his horse like he was born to it, to the calculating sweep of his gaze across her land. By noon, when the sun had climbed high enough to drive even the lizards into shade, Clara made her weekly trip to town for supplies. Dry Creek wasn't much more than a main street with pretensions, boasting Murphy's General Store, a saloon that doubled as a hotel, a blacksmith, and a few other establishments that served the scattered ranches and farms of the territory. She tied her old mare, Buttermilk, to the hitching post outside Murphy's and steeled herself for the usual gauntlet of stares and whispers. The bell above the door chimed her arrival, and conversations paused mid-sentence before resuming in lower tones. Mrs. Morrison. Mr. Murphy greeted her with his practiced shopkeeper's smile. What can I help you with today? Clara had just begun to recite her list when the bell chimed again. The very air in the store seemed to shift, growing heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. She didn't need to turn to know who had entered. She could feel his presence like a change in the weather. The stranger from that morning stood in the doorway, his hat casting shadows across his face. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of years in the saddle. His clothes were trail-worn but well-maintained, his gun belt worn with the casual ease of long familiarity. Dark eyes surveyed the store's interior before settling on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been courtesy or mockery. Clara nodded stiffly. Turning back to Mr. Murphy, "A pound of coffee, please, and salt." The stranger moved past her to examine the display of ammunition, his spurs singing softly against the floorboards. Clara was acutely aware of every sound he made, every breath he took. When he spoke again, his voice was low and measured. "Murphy, I'm looking for information about land hereabouts. Grazing land, specifically." The shopkeeper's eyes darted between Clara and the stranger. "Well now, Mr. Wade, Cole Wade. Mr. Wade. Most of the good grazing land around here is spoken for. The Hendricks spread to the north, the Carlson place to the east." Murphy paused meaningfully. "Though I suppose there might be some parcels that could become available, given the right circumstances." Clara's hands tightened on her purse. She knew exactly what Murphy was implying, and heat rose in her cheeks. "Is that so?" Wade's tone was neutral, but Clara caught him glancing her way. "And what kind of circumstances might those be?" "Oh, you know how it is." Murphy continued, warming to his subject. "Farming and ranching out here, it's hard work. Not everyone's cut out for it. Sometimes folks realize they'd be better off selling, moving somewhere more suitable to their abilities." "I'll take my goods now, Mr. Murphy." Clara interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, as Murphy wrapped her purchases, fumbling in his haste. Wade moved closer, not threatening, exactly, but near enough that she could smell leather and trail dust, near enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Mrs. Morrison, isn't it?" he said quietly. "I heard about your loss. My condolences." Clara's spine stiffened. "I don't believe we've been introduced. Mr. Wade." "No, ma'am, we haven't. But in a town this size, word travels." He paused, studying her with those dark eyes. "That's good land you've got out there. Must be hard, managing it alone." There it was. Then, the opening gambit in a game she'd been forced to play too many times already. Clara gathered her packages, holding them like a shield between them. "I manage well enough," she said coolly. "Good day, Mr. Wade." She swept past him, or tried to, but his voice followed her to the door. "I'm sure you do, ma'am, for now." The words hung in the air like a threat or a promise. Clara didn't look back, didn't acknowledge she'd heard, but her hands trembled as she loaded her supplies into the wagon. All the way home, she felt the weight of those dark eyes on her back, the calculating assessment of a predator who'd found his prey. That evening, as purple shadows stretched long across the desert and the first coyotes began their nightly chorus, Clara stood again on her porch. Somewhere out there, Cole Wade was making his own calculations, planning his approach. She knew his type, men who saw opportunity in others' misfortune, who circled like vultures waiting for weakness to show. But Clara Morrison had buried a husband, survived a winter alone, and fought off 2 rattlesnakes just last week. If Mr. Cole Wade thought she would simply fold at the first sign of pressure, he was about to learn otherwise. This land was bought with Thomas's blood, paid for with his dreams. She'd not surrender it to anyone, no matter how dark their eyes or how confident their swagger. The wind picked up, rattling the loose board on the barn that Thomas had always meant to fix. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and went inside to tend to her solitary supper. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she was certain. But tonight, the land was still hers, and that was enough. In the distance, a wolf howled, wild and lonely. Clara understood the sound all too well. In this harsh land, everyone was alone in the end. The only question was whether you were strong enough to survive it. 3 days passed before Cole Wade appeared at Clara's gate, his arrival announced by the creaking of leather and the soft nickering of his horse. Clara was in the garden, wrestling with the stubborn soil that seemed determined to reject her attempts at cultivation. She straightened slowly, wiping dirt-stained hands on her apron. and watched him dismount with that fluid grace she'd noticed before. "Mrs. Morrison," he called, keeping a respectful distance from the fence. "I wonder if I might have a word." Clara moved toward him, each step measured and careful. "State your business." "Mr. Wade." He gestured toward her fence line, where several posts leaned drunkenly. "Couldn't help but notice you've got some repairs needed. I've got time on my hands and experience with such work. Thought I might offer my services." "I don't recall asking for help." "No, ma'am, you didn't." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair dampened with sweat. "But neighbors help neighbors out here. It's how we survive." "We're not neighbors. Mr. Wade, you don't own land here." "Not yet," he agreed easily, and something in that casual confidence made her stomach tighten. "But I'm looking to change that. In the meantime, that fence won't fix itself, and your cattle are already eyeing those gaps." As if to prove his point, one of her steers ambled toward the weakened section, its intentions clear. Clara bit back a curse that would have shocked her mother. The animal had been testing that spot for days. "What's your price?" she asked finally. "No price. Like I said, neighbors help neighbors." Clara studied him, searching for the trap. Men like Cole Wade didn't offer something for nothing. There was always a cost, even if it wasn't spoken aloud. But with the fence failing and her limited funds already stretched thin, "I'll fix my own fence," she said firmly. He shrugged, replacing his hat. "Suit yourself, ma'am. But if you change your mind, I'm staying at the hotel in town." He mounted his horse and rode away without another word, leaving Clara standing in her dusty garden, pride warring with practicality. She spent the rest of the afternoon struggling with fence posts and wire, her hands bleeding from a dozen small cuts, her back aching from the effort. By sunset, she'd managed to shore up the worst section, but it was a temporary solution at best. The next morning brought news that set the whole town buzzing. A sandstorm was brewing to the west, the kind that could strip paint from buildings and drive cattle mad with thirst. Clara heard about it from Sam Hutchins, who delivered mail when he wasn't drinking away his pension. "Big one coming, Mrs. Morrison," Sam warned, his rheumy eyes concerned. "Seen the signs yesterday, birds flying wrong way, that yellow tinge to the horizon? You'd best get your stock secured." Clara thanked him and set about preparing, but her heart sank as she surveyed what needed doing. The barn roof had loose boards that would become projectiles in high wind. The chicken coop needed reinforcing, and the cattle, she'd need to drive them to the sheltered draw on the eastern edge of her property, a job that really required 2 people. She was struggling to herd the stubborn beasts when she heard hoofbeats. Cole Wade appeared like something out of the gathering dust, his horse cutting expertly between her and the scattering cattle. "Storm's coming faster than expected," he called out. "These need to be in shelter within the hour." Pride be damned. Clara nodded curtly. "The draw's that way." Together, they worked with an efficiency born of necessity. Cole's horse and expertise made the job almost easy, the cattle responding to his commands as they never did to hers. Within 30 minutes, they had the herd moving towards safety, the wind already picking up, carrying the taste of dust and danger. "The barn!" Clara shouted over the rising howl. "The roof!" "I'll see to it. You get the chickens secured." They worked in tandem as the sky darkened to an ominous brown-yellow. Cole climbed onto her roof with a hammer and nails from his saddlebags, securing the loose boards with quick, sure strokes. Clara battened down everything she could, her skirts whipping around her legs, her hair escaping from its pins to stream like a banner. The storm hit just as they finished, a wall of sand and fury that turned day to night. Clara stumbled toward the house, but the wind knocked her sideways. Strong hands caught her, pulled her against a solid chest. Cole half carried her to the porch, both of them fighting for each step. They tumbled through her door just as the worst of it struck. The house groaned and shuddered, windows rattling in their frames. Clara found herself pressed against the door, Cole's body shielding her from the wind that sought entrance through every crack and gap. For a long moment, they stayed frozen like that, breathing hard, the storm raging outside. Clara became acutely aware of his warmth, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his arms braced on either side of her. When she looked up, his face was inches from hers, his dark eyes unreadable in the dim light. "You're bleeding," he said quietly. Clara glanced down at her hands, seeing the cuts from yesterday's fence work reopened and seeping. "It's nothing. It's something." He stepped back, giving her space, and she found she could breathe again. "Where do you keep your medical supplies?" She directed him to the kitchen drawer where she kept bandages and salve. He tended to her hands with surprising gentleness, his own calloused fingers careful on her wounds. Neither spoke as the storm raged outside, the silence between them filled with unasked questions and unspoken answers. "Why?" Clara asked finally. "Why help me?" Cole finished wrapping her left hand, his touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Maybe I'm just neighborly, or maybe you think kindness will get you my land cheaper than gold would." He looked up sharply, and for the first time, she saw something genuine flicker across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "You don't trust easy, do you, Mrs. Morrison?" "I've learned not to, Mr. Wade." He released her hands and moved to the window, watching the storm. "Smart woman. Trust is a luxury out here." He paused. "But sometimes, ma'am, a fence is just a fence, and help is just help." The storm continued through the night. Cole slept in the barn. Clara had offered the sofa, but he'd declined with a propriety she hadn't expected. She lay awake listening to the wind, thinking about the man who'd appeared at just the right moment, whose hands had been gentle on her wounds, whose presence had made an impossible task merely difficult. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Drifts of sand piled against buildings like snow. Debris littered the ground, but her cattle were safe, her chickens accounted for, her roof intact. Cole was already up, feeding her horses. He looked up as she approached with coffee and biscuits, a peace offering of sorts. "Damage could have been worse," he said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Thanks to you." He shrugged. "You'd have managed." "Maybe, maybe not." Clara studied him over her own cup. "I misjudged you, perhaps." "Perhaps. A woman alone learns caution. Mr. Wade, but I appreciate what you did yesterday." He nodded slowly. "I understand caution. Ma'am, I've got my own reasons for it." Something shadowed his eyes, a hint of old pain quickly hidden. "But I meant what I said. Sometimes help is just help." They stood in companionable silence, surveying the storm's aftermath. Then Cole set down his cup and moved toward his horse. "I should go. Town's probably needing hands for cleanup." "Mr. Wade," Clara called as he mounted. He looked back, waiting. "If you're still looking for work, I could use help with that fence. I can't pay much, but room and board would be fair." He interrupted. "If you've got a corner of the barn I could bed down in." Clara's heart hammered. Inviting him to stay, even in the barn, was a risk. The town would talk, but then they talked anyway. And she did need the help. "The tack room's empty," she heard herself say. "You can start tomorrow." He touched his hat brim, that gesture that was becoming familiar. Tomorrow, then. As he rode away, Clara wondered what she'd just done, but her hands, wrapped in his careful bandages, reminded her that sometimes survival meant accepting help, even from mysterious cowboys with calculating eyes and gentle hands. The storm had passed, but she suspected another was just beginning. The proposal came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after Cole had taken up residence in her barn. The sun was setting in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, when he approached her on the porch where she sat mending a torn shirt. "Mrs. Morrison," he began, his hat in his hands. "I need to speak plainly with you." Clara set down her needlework, something in his tone making her pulse quicken. "Go on, Mr. Wade." He took a breath, his usual easy confidence seeming to desert him. "You know why I came to Dry Creek. I've been honest about wanting land, wanting to build something here." He paused, dark eyes meeting hers. "What I hadn't expected was, well, you. Mr. Wade, hear me out, please." He moved closer, still maintaining a proper distance. "This town, they're circling you like wolves. That banker Hartwell was out here yesterday when you were in town. I sent him on his way. But he'll be back. And there's talk that Judge Carlson's son has his eye on this place." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. She'd noticed the increasing pressure, the casual visits from men with offers to buy, the whispered conversations that ceased when she entered a room. "What I'm proposing," Cole continued, "is a business arrangement, marriage, in name only, if that's your preference. You keep your land legally protected. I get a stake in building something here. We both benefit." The words hung between them like dust motes in the fading light. Clara felt the world tilt slightly, as if the very earth had shifted beneath her feet. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building in the looks they shared over morning coffee, in the way he'd started unconsciously planning improvements to the property as if he meant to stay. "A business arrangement," she repeated slowly. "It doesn't have to be, that is, I'm not expecting—" He struggled, and she realized she'd never seen him at a loss for words before. "You'd have your privacy, your own space. I'm not asking for more than partnership." Clara stood, moving to the porch rail, needing distance to think. Behind her, she heard Cole shift. "Waiting. My husband has been dead less than a year," she said quietly. "I know." His voice was gentle. "I'm not asking you to forget him. I'm offering you a way to keep what he left you." She turned to face him then, searching his features in the dying light. "And what do you get, Mr. Wade? Half ownership of 40 acres of stubborn land? That's a poor trade for a man's freedom." Something flickered in his eyes. "Maybe I'm tired of freedom. Maybe a man reaches a point where belonging somewhere matters more than being able to leave any time." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. In the weeks he'd been working her land, she'd seen glimpses of the man beneath the cowboy facade, the way he handled her horses with uncommon gentleness, his quiet competence with every task, the books she'd spotted in his saddlebags. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course." He replaced his hat. "But Clara, Mrs. Morrison, don't take too long. Hartwell's not the only one making plans." That night, Clara lay awake wrestling with the decision. The practical part of her knew Cole was right. A widow's hold on land was tenuous at best. Marriage would provide legal protection, an answer to the whispers and schemes, but her heart— She pressed her face into the pillow that had once held Thomas's scent, now long faded. What would he think of her, considering marriage for such calculated reasons? But hadn't their own marriage begun with practical considerations? Love had come later, grown from shared struggles and quiet evenings. By morning, she'd made her decision. She found Cole already at work, repairing the corral gate. He looked up at her approach, his expression carefully neutral. "Yes," she said simply. He straightened slowly. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, on your terms, a business arrangement." Something passed over his face too quickly to read. "When?" "Soon, before anyone can interfere." She twisted her wedding ring. Thomas's ring. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "I keep Thomas's name hyphenated with yours. Morrison Wade. The land stays in both our names equally, and—" She hesitated, then forged on. "Separate bedrooms. Agreed." He extended his hand as if sealing a business deal. After a moment, she took it. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. "Saturday, then," he said. "I'll arrange things with Reverend Mills." The wedding was a sparse affair. Clara wore her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the gray in her eyes. Cole had somehow procured a proper suit, transforming himself into a stranger who was both more and less than the cowboy she'd come to know. Only a handful of witnesses attended. Sam Hutchins, surprisingly sober for the occasion, Mrs. Eliza Patterson, the minister's wife who'd always been kind to Clara, and Doc Brennan, who served as Cole's witness. Reverend Mills performed the ceremony with obvious reluctance, his disapproval evident in every clipped word. When he reached the part about loving, honoring, and cherishing, Clara felt Cole's hand tighten almost imperceptibly on hers. "I do," she said when prompted, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. "I do?" Cole echoed, his voice steady. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Mills said with clear distaste. Cole leaned in, his lips barely brushing her cheek in a gesture so proper it was almost insulting. Yet Clara felt the touch like a brand, her skin tingling long after he'd stepped back. The ride back to the ranch, their ranch now, was silent. The weight of what they'd done settled over Clara like a heavy blanket. She was a married woman again, but this time to a near stranger, bound by paper and necessity rather than love. That evening found them sitting awkwardly at the kitchen table, the lamp casting dancing shadows on the walls. Cole had moved his few possessions into the spare room, maintaining the boundaries they'd agreed upon. "I thought we should discuss how this will work," he said, pouring coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "Day to day, I mean, we continue as we have been." Clara replied, "You work the land. I maintain the house. We share meals when convenient. And in town," she understood his meaning. "In town, we're husband and wife, united front. The talk will be vicious for a while." "Let them talk." Clara's chin lifted. "They were talking anyway." Cole studied her across the table. "You're stronger than you look. Clara Morrison Wade." It was the first time he'd used her newly hyphenated name, and something about it made her shiver. "I've had to be. I know." He reached across the table, stopping just short of her hand. "I want you to know what we did today. It doesn't change my respect for you, or my intentions. I said business arrangement, and I meant it." "Sssss." Clara looked at his hand, so close to hers, and felt an unexpected pang of loss for possibilities that would never be explored. But she'd made her choice with eyes open. "I appreciate that, Mr. Wade." "Cole," he corrected gently. "We're married now. Might as well use first names." "Cole," she repeated, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. Later, as she prepared for bed in the room she'd shared with Thomas. Clara heard Cole moving about in his own space. The house felt different with another person in it, fuller but somehow lonelier too. She touched the new ring on her finger, a simple band Cole had produced from somewhere, and wondered what she'd done. Outside, a coyote howled, and another answered from across the valley. Even the wild creatures had their pairs. Clara thought, but what did she have? A business partner, a protector, a stranger who was now her husband. She blew out the lamp and lay in the darkness, acutely aware of Cole's presence just down the hall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, facing the town as a married couple, weathering the gossip and speculation, learning to live alongside a man she barely knew. But tonight, for the first time in months, her land felt secure. If that security came at the cost of her heart's solitude, perhaps it was a fair trade. After all, her heart had been buried with Thomas in the cemetery on the hill. What Cole had married was merely the shell that remained. Yet, as sleep finally claimed her, Clara couldn't shake the memory of his hand reaching for hers across the table, or the way he'd said her new name like it was something precious. Business arrangement, she reminded herself firmly. Nothing more. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. And somewhere in the darkness, she heard Cole's footsteps pause outside her door before continuing on. Just checking, she told herself. Just being protective of his investment. But her traitorous heart beat a little faster all the same. The first crack in Cole's carefully constructed walls appeared on a rain-soaked evening in early October. Clara had been preserving the last of the summer vegetables when she heard his horse returning from town. Something in the gait was wrong. Too slow. Too uneven. She wiped her hands and stepped onto the porch, peering through the downpour. Cole sat slumped in the saddle, one hand pressed to his side, even through the rain, She could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. "Cole!" She ran into the storm, reaching for his horse's bridle. "What happened?" "Slight disagreement in town," he mumbled, swaying dangerously. "Nothing serious," but his face was pale as parchment, and when he tried to dismount, his legs buckled. Clara caught him, staggering under his weight, rain plastering her hair to her face. "Can you walk?" "Of course I can walk." He took 2 steps and would have fallen if she hadn't wedged herself under his arm. Maybe not. Together they stumbled into the house, leaving muddy tracks across her clean floors. Clara guided him to the kitchen table, where the lamplight revealed the extent of his injury. A knife wound, deep and ugly, scored his ribs. "Who did this?" she demanded, already gathering supplies. "Doesn't matter. It matters to me." She began cutting away his shirt, trying not to notice the lean muscles beneath, the collection of old scars that spoke of a violent past. Was it about the land? About us? Cole hissed as she cleaned the wound. "Some cowboys from the Triple Bar. They had opinions about our marriage they felt needed expressing." Clara's hand stilled. The Triple Bar was owned by Judge Carlson, whose son had indeed been eyeing her property. "How many?" "3. Don't worry, they look worse than I do." "Fool man," she muttered, but her touch was gentle as she continued her ministrations. "You could have been killed." Would that have mattered? His voice was soft, almost vulnerable. Clara looked up, meeting his dark eyes. "Of course it would matter. We're partners." Something flickered in his gaze. Disappointment. "Right, partners." She returned to her work, aware of the intimacy of the moment. The rain drummed on the roof, cocooning them in a world of lamplight and shadow. Cole's breathing was shallow, pained, but he didn't complain as she stitched the wound with careful fingers. "You've done this before," he observed. "Thomas worked the mines. Injuries were common." She tied off the thread, then began wrapping bandages around his chest. "There, you'll live. Pity. Would have solved your problems nicely if I hadn't." Clara's hand cracked across his cheek before she realized she'd moved. They stared at each other, both shocked. "Don't," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare. You think I want another death on my conscience? You think I want to bury another—" Her voice broke. Cole caught her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I'm sorry. Clara." She should pull away, should maintain the careful distance they'd established. But something in his eyes held her, a loneliness that matched her own, a pain that went deeper than the wound she'd just tended. "Why did you really come to Dry Creek?" she asked softly. "A man like you could go anywhere, do anything. Why here?" Cole released her hand slowly. "Maybe I was running from something. Maybe I was looking for something. Maybe both." He tried to stand, winced, and sank back down. "Every man has ghosts. Clara, mine just happened to chase me here." "What kind of ghosts?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring at the rain-lashed window, he began to speak. "I had a brother once, younger than me, Daniel. He was everything I wasn't. Gentle, trusting, believed the best of everyone." Cole's jaw tightened. "I was supposed to protect him." "That's what big brothers do, right? But I was off chasing gold in California, making my fortune. Told him I'd send for him when I struck it rich." Clara sank into the chair across from him, sensing the weight of what was coming. "While I was gone, he got mixed up with some bad men, thought they were his friends. They used him to rob a bank. Told him they were just going to scare the banker who'd been foreclosing on folks unfairly. Daniel believed them." Cole's voice turned bitter. "He was holding the horses when the shooting started. Took a bullet meant for one of the real robbers. He was 17. Cole. I got back 3 days after they buried him. Found out the whole story from his girl, sweet little thing named Mary, who'd tried to warn him. The men who'd used him were long gone. Of course, but the banker who'd started it all, who'd driven desperate men to violence with his greed, he was still there, still foreclosing, still destroying lives." Clara's blood ran cold. "What did you do?" Cole looked at her then, and she saw the darkness he carried. "What do you think I did? I called him out, fair and square, in front of witnesses. He drew first. He was always going to draw first. Men like that are all cowards underneath. But I was faster. Self-defense. That's what the law said. But his family had connections. Made it clear I wasn't welcome in California anymore. So I drifted. Hired out my gun when I needed to. Tried to find something worth staying for. Then I heard about a little town in Arizona territory. Good land available. A chance to build something instead of tear it down. And you found a widow who needed protecting." Clara finished softly. "I found a woman who didn't need anyone." Cole corrected. "Strong, stubborn, brave enough to face down a whole town that wanted her gone. I thought maybe if I could help her keep what was hers, it would balance the scales somehow, make up for failing Daniel." Clara reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "You can't save him by saving me." "I know." His fingers turned, interlacing with hers. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about him, started being about you, about the way you hum when you're cooking, the way you talk to the chickens like they understand you, the way you look in the morning sun. "Cole." Her voice was a warning, but her hand didn't move. "I know, business arrangement. I haven't forgotten." He squeezed her fingers gently, then let go. But a man can't help what he feels. Clara, he can only control what he does about it. The rain had softened to a gentle patter. Clara stood, needing distance from the intensity in his eyes. "You should rest. That wound needs time to heal." "Clara." She paused at the doorway, not turning. "What happened to him? To Thomas? You've never said." She closed her eyes, seeing again that terrible day. Cave-in at the mine. They were shoring up a new tunnel, trying to beat the other crews to a fresh vein. The supports weren't strong enough. Thomas and 3 others. They never had a chance. "I'm sorry. He was a good man, kind, gentle. He made me laugh." She turned then, meeting Cole's gaze. "Nothing like you." "No," Cole agreed quietly. "Nothing like me." Later, as she helped him to his room, Cole stumbled, and for a moment they were pressed close, her arms around his waist, his breath warm on her hair. Time seemed to pause, the world narrowing to just this, 2 lonely souls finding comfort in each other's proximity. "Clara," he whispered, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. "You need to rest," she said firmly, but her voice trembled. She settled him on his bed, pulling a blanket over him. As she turned to go, his hand caught hers. "Thank you for tending my wounds, all of them." Clara looked down at their joined hands, at the wedding ring that had become less foreign over the weeks. "That's what partners do," she said softly, and gently pulled free. But that night, as she lay in her solitary bed, she could still feel the warmth of his touch, still hear the raw honesty in his voice as he'd shared his deepest pain. The walls between them were still there, but they'd developed cracks, places where the light could seep through. Outside, the rain had stopped, and stars began to appear between the clouds. Clara touched her lips, remembering words she'd almost spoken, admissions she'd almost made, business arrangement, she reminded herself. But her heart, that traitorous organ she'd thought dead and buried, whispered other possibilities in the darkness. The attack came on a moonless night in November, when the first bite of winter was in the air. Clara woke to the sound of horses, too many horses, and Cole's urgent voice at her door. "Clara! Get dressed and get your rifle, now!" She threw on a wrapper over her nightgown and grabbed the Winchester from beside her bed. Through the window, she could see torches bobbing like fireflies in the darkness. Her blood ran cold. Cole was already at the front window, his own rifle ready. In the weeks since his injury, they'd fallen into an easier rhythm. But now all that careful peace shattered like glass. "How many?" she whispered, joining him. 8, maybe 10. They're heading for the barn first." His jaw was tight with controlled fury. "They mean to burn us out. The cattle are in the far pasture. It's us they want. not the stock." He checked his ammunition. "When this starts, I want you to—" The night exploded in gunfire. Windows shattered, showering them with glass. Clara dropped to the floor, crawling to the other window. She'd never shot at a man before, but as she saw masked figures approaching her home, Thomas's home, rage overcame fear. The Winchester kicked against her shoulder as she fired. A man cried out, clutching his leg, and savage satisfaction flooded through her. "That's my girl," Cole muttered, returning fire with deadly precision. The battle seemed to last forever, though it was probably only minutes. Clara's ears rang from the gunshots, her hands steady despite the terror threatening to overwhelm her. When a figure tried to circle around to the back door, she was ready, her shot driving him back into the darkness. Then, sudden silence. The attacking riders had pulled back, regrouping near the road. Clara could hear rough voices arguing, though she couldn't make out the words. "They'll rush us next," Cole said grimly. "All at once. Clara, I need you to—" "I'm not leaving you." "Damn it, woman. This isn't the time for stubbornness." "I'm not leaving you," she repeated firmly. "This is my land, my home. I'll defend it or die trying." Cole turned to her then, and even in the darkness, she could see the fierce pride in his eyes. "You are the most infuriatingly brave woman I've ever known. Save the sweet talk for later. Cowboy, they're coming back." And they were. This time, the riders came from 3 directions at once. Clara fired until her rifle was empty, then grabbed Thomas's old Colt revolver beside her. Cole was a deadly force, each shot carefully placed, economical in his violence. A torch sailed through the broken window, landing on her good rug. Clara stomped it out, coughing from the smoke. Another followed, then another. The house began to fill with acrid fumes. "We can't stay here," Cole coughed. "They'll smoke us out or burn us alive." Just then, a new sound cut through the chaos. More horses. "Coming fast from town," Sheriff Watson's voice boomed across the yard. "This is the law. Drop your weapons or we'll drop you where you stand." The attackers scattered like quail, racing for the darkness. A few more shots rang out as the sheriff's men gave chase. Then blessed quiet descended. Clara slumped against the wall, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. Cole was beside her in an instant, his hands running over her arms, her face, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt, Clara? Talk to me." "I'm fine," she managed. I think I need to sit down." He helped her to a chair, then lit a lamp with shaking hands. In the light, she could see blood on his shirt. His wound had reopened in the fight. "You're bleeding again." "It's nothing. Clara, you were—" He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "You were magnificent. When I saw you standing there, defending your home like an avenging angel—" "Our home," she corrected softly. "It's our home, Cole." Sheriff Watson's heavy tread on the porch interrupted them. "Everyone all right in there?" Cole rose to let him in, and Clara tried to compose herself. The sheriff surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "Got a few of them. Others got away, but we know who they are. Triple bar riders, just like we suspected." He looked at Clara with something approaching respect. "Heard the shooting from town. Never seen a woman handle a Winchester like that. Mrs. Wade." "Morrison Wade," Clara corrected automatically, then froze. When had she stopped thinking of herself as just Morrison? "We'll need statements," Watson continued. "But that can wait for morning. You folks need anything tonight?" After he left, Clara and Cole worked in silence to clean up the worst of the damage. Glass crunched under their feet, and the smell of smoke lingered. But the house had survived. They had survived. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara found herself on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the sun rise over her land, their land. Cole joined her, moving stiffly from his reopened wound. "We should tend that," she said. "In a minute." He stood beside her, close but not touching. "Clara, what you did tonight, what we did," she corrected. We defended our home. Together. Together, he agreed softly. Then, with careful deliberation, he reached out and took her hand. Clara looked down at their intertwined fingers, at the way they fit together like puzzle pieces. She thought of Thomas, of the gentle love they'd shared, and realized with a start that her grief no longer consumed her. It was still there, would always be there, but it had transformed into something bearable, something that could exist alongside other feelings. "Cole," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the emotions churning inside her. "I know," he said simply. "I know we agreed to terms. Business only, but Clara, when I thought they might hurt you, when I saw you fighting beside me," his voice roughened, "I've never been so terrified in my life. And I realized something." "What?" The word was barely a whisper. "That 40 acres isn't worth a damn to me without you on it. That all I really want is the right to stand beside you, protect you, make you smile when you're sad and laugh when you're angry." He turned to face her fully. "I know I'm not Thomas. I'm not gentle or easy. I've got blood on my hands and darkness in my past. But Clara, if you could find it in your heart to let me try." Clara reached up, touching his face where her hand had struck it weeks ago. "You foolish man," she said softly. "Don't you know?" "Know what?" "That you already have, every day, with every gesture, every sacrifice, every moment you've stood beside me instead of trying to stand over me." She took a shaky breath. "I thought my heart was buried with Thomas, but you've helped me find it again, piece by piece." "Clara," his voice was wondering, hopeful. "I'm not saying it will be easy." She continued. "I'm still learning to be myself again, still fighting these ghosts. And the town, after tonight." "Let them talk," Cole said fiercely. "Let them all talk. I'll stand with you against the whole world if I have to." "I know you will." She smiled then, the first real smile she'd given since Thomas died. "That's why I love you." The words hung between them like morning stars, bright and startling. Cole's breath caught, his eyes searching hers. "Say it again." "I love you, Cole Wade, not for the land, not for protection, but for the man who reads poetry when he thinks I'm not looking, who talks to my horses like they're old friends, who bleeds for my safety and asks nothing in return." He pulled her to him then, his kiss fierce and tender at once, full of promises and possibilities. Clara melted into him, feeling the last walls between them crumble like old adobe in the rain. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "You own my heart, Clara Morrison Wade. Have since the day you stood up to me in Murphy's store like a spitting wild cat." "Only your heart?" she teased, still breathless. "My heart, my soul, my gun, my life, all of it, forever, if you'll have me." "Forever," she agreed, and kissed him again as the sun climbed higher, blessing their battlefield with golden light. The town would talk. There would be legal battles over the attack, more challenges to face, but standing there in Cole's arms, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Hope. Not just for survival, but for happiness, for a future built on more than grief and duty. "You took the widow for land," she murmured against his lips, echoing the old gossip with gentle humor. "But my touch claimed your heart." "Best trade I ever made," Cole replied, and led her inside their home, where the bullet holes in the walls would become part of their story, proof of what they'd fought for and won, not just land, but love itself. The stranger arrived on the afternoon stage, his presence announced by the cloud of dust that followed the coach into town. Clara was at Murphy's store when the commotion began, whispers rippling through the gathered townsfolk like wind through wheat. "That's him, Mrs." Patterson hissed to her companion. "William Morrison, Thomas's cousin from back east." Clara's blood ran cold. She abandoned her shopping and hurried outside, where a well-dressed man in a city suit was supervising the unloading of several trunks. He had Thomas's coloring, but none of his warmth. his pale eyes sharp and calculating as they surveyed the town. "Mrs. Morrison?" His voice was cultured, cold. "Or should I say, Mrs. Wade now?" "Morrison Wade," Clara corrected, lifting her chin. "And you are?" "William Morrison, Thomas's first cousin. I believe we have matters to discuss regarding my late cousin's estate." "There's nothing to discuss. Thomas left everything to me, legal and proper." William's smile was thin as paper. "Perhaps not. I've brought documentation that might suggest otherwise." He tipped his hat mockingly. "I'll be staying at the hotel. Good day, cousin." Clara rode home with her heart hammering. She found Cole working with a new horse, his movements easy and confident until he saw her face. "What's wrong?" she explained quickly, watching his expression darken. "He says he has documentation. Cole, what if— Hey!" He caught her shoulders gently. "We'll face this together. Whatever he's got, we'll handle it." But William Morrison proved to be a more formidable opponent than the night raiders. He was educated, connected, and utterly ruthless. Within days, he'd filed a formal claim with the territorial court, alleging that Thomas's will was invalid, that Clara had exerted undue influence on a sick man, and that the property rightfully belonged to Thomas's blood relatives. "It's a common tactic," Judge Peters explained when Cole and Clara consulted him. Peters was one of the few honest judges in the territory, but even he looked concerned. "Attack the widow's character, suggest impropriety, and with your recent remarriage so soon after Thomas's death, that was for protection." Clara protested. "I know that, you know that, but a court, especially with the right pressure applied." Peters shook his head. "You'll need to be prepared for a fight." The legal maneuvering began in earnest. William hired Josiah Hartwell, the very banker who'd been trying to force Clara off her land, as his local representative. Together, they painted a picture of Clara as a calculating woman who'd married Thomas for his property, then quickly remarried to cement her claim. Heard she was spooning with that gunslinger while poor Thomas's body was still warm. Clara overheard someone say at the Mercantile, "Always did think there was something off about her. Too independent for a proper woman." The words stung, but worse was the way some people looked at her now, with suspicion where there had once been sympathy. Cole wanted to confront William directly, but Clara held him back. "Violence won't help us now. We need to be smarter than that." She was right, but the restraint cost him. Clara could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his hand drifted to his gun whenever William appeared in town. The hearing was set for the following week. Clara threw herself into gathering evidence. Thomas's letters, witnesses to their marriage, anything that might help. Doc Brennan agreed to testify that Thomas had been of sound mind when he made his will. Sam Hutchins offered to speak about Thomas's devotion to Clara, but on the night before the hearing, disaster struck again. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and Cole's shout. The barn was ablaze, flames reaching hungrily toward the star-filled sky. "The horses!" Clara ran for the building, but Cole caught her. "It's too late. Clara, stop!" They could only watch as the structure collapsed, taking with it their winter feed, tools, and, most devastatingly, the trunk where Clara kept Thomas's papers, including the original will. "Convenient fire," Sheriff Watson muttered, surveying the scene at dawn. But without proof, there was nothing he could do. Clara stood among the ashes, fighting despair. Without the will, their case was significantly weakened. William's timing had been perfect. "We could leave," Cole said quietly. "Start over somewhere else. I've got some money saved." "No?" Clara's voice was steel. "This is my land, Thomas's land. I won't be driven off by a vulture in a fancy suit." The courtroom was packed for the hearing. Clara wore her best dress, the blue one from their wedding, and tried not to fidget as William's lawyer presented his case. The allegations were even worse than she'd expected. They'd found people willing to swear they'd seen her with Cole before Thomas died, that she'd been overly friendly with various men in town, that Thomas had expressed doubts about her faithfulness. Lies. Cole muttered beside her, his knuckles white. When it was their turn, their lawyer, a young man from Tucson who was clearly overwhelmed, did his best. Doc Brennan testified firmly about Thomas's mental state. Sam Hutchins spoke movingly about the couple's devotion, but without the will itself. It was their word against William's documents. Then, just as things looked darkest, the courtroom door opened. A young woman entered, travel-worn and clearly nervous. Clara gasped in recognition. "Mary?" Cole was on his feet. "Mary Daniels." It was indeed Mary, the girl who'd loved Cole's brother Daniel. She clutched a leather portfolio to her chest, her eyes finding Cole's across the room. "I heard you were in trouble," she said simply. I thought you should see these." The portfolio contained letters, dozens of them, from Thomas to his cousin William, spanning years. Letters that made clear Thomas's opinion of his grasping relative, his determination to keep the family land out of William's hands, and his absolute devotion to Clara. "Where did you get these?" the judge demanded. Mary lifted her chin. "Mr. William Morrison hired me as a secretary when he was preparing his case. He didn't know who I was, didn't know my connection to Mr. Wade. I took them from his files. He was planning to destroy them." The courtroom erupted. William's lawyer objected furiously. But the damage was done. The letters were authenticated, their content devastating to William's case. But William wasn't finished. Rising, his face twisted with rage, he pointed at Clara. "That woman is a shame to my cousin's memory. Look at her, already in another man's bed, parading around as if—" Cole moved faster than thought. His fist connected with William's jaw, sending the man crashing into the defense table. "Cole, no!" Clara caught his arm before he could strike again. "Order!" The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Wade, you'll control yourself or be held in contempt." "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Cole said, not sounding sorry at all. "But I won't stand by while anyone insults my wife's honor." Clara felt a rush of love so fierce it took her breath. This man, who'd learned to control his violence, who'd chosen law over vengeance, had risked everything to defend her name. The judge reviewed the letters in chambers while the courtroom waited in tense silence. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Mr. Morrison, these letters make your cousin's intentions crystal clear. Furthermore, there's evidence here suggesting you've been harassing Thomas and Clara for years, trying to obtain this property through various schemes." He looked at William with disgust. "Your claim is dismissed. The property belongs to Mrs. Morrison Wade, as her late husband intended." The courtroom burst into chaos. Some cheered, more supporters than Clara had realized. Others muttered darkly. William had to be restrained by the bailiff, screaming threats as he was dragged out. Outside the courthouse, Clara stood in the sunshine, feeling as if she'd been released from prison. Cole stood beside her, solid and reassuring, while Mary hung back uncertainly. "Thank you," Clara told the young woman. "What you did, you saved us." Mary's eyes were on Cole. "I owed him that much, for Daniel, for not being brave enough to stop it before." "You were just a girl," Cole said gently. "What happened to Daniel wasn't your fault. I know, but I could have done more. This makes it a little better." She managed to smile. "Besides, when I heard what that awful man was trying to do, how he was lying about Mrs. Wade, well, some things just aren't right." They offered her a place to stay, work at the ranch, but Mary declined. "I've got a position waiting in San Francisco, but thank you." She pressed Cole's hand. "Be happy." Daniel would have wanted that. As they rode home, Clara reached over to take Cole's hand. "You hit him. He insulted you. You could have been held in contempt, jailed. It could have hurt our case." Cole brought her hand to his lips. "Worth it to see his face when I laid him out." Clara laughed, surprising herself with the sound. "My violent hero. Your hero. Anyway, violent only when necessary." He grew serious. "Clara, what Mary did, it was brave, but we can't count on that kind of luck again. William won't give up easily." He was right. Word came within days that William was planning an appeal. that he'd hired better lawyers, that he was spreading poison about them throughout the territory. But for now, they were home. Their land was safe. And as Clara stood in Cole's arms that night, watching the stars through their bedroom window, their shared bedroom now, the careful distance between them finally dissolved. She felt something she hadn't experienced in so long. Peace. I love you, she whispered against his chest. Love you too, Wildcat, he murmured, using the pet name he'd adopted since the fight. Forever and then some. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight they were together, united not just by law or necessity, but by love tested in fire and stronger for the burning. The appeal hearing arrived with the first snow of winter, transforming Dry Creek into something almost picturesque. Clara stood before the mirror in their room, pinning up her hair with steady hands while Cole watched from the doorway. You look beautiful, he said softly. I look like a woman ready to fight for what's hers, Clara corrected, but she smiled at his reflection. The territorial courthouse in Prescott was a far grander affair than their local courtroom. William had indeed hired impressive counsel, 3 lawyers from Denver who looked like they ate small-town folks for breakfast. But Clara had done her own preparing, with the help of Reverend Mills's wife, who'd surprised everyone by stepping forward. They'd gathered testimonials from dozens of townspeople. Even some who'd whispered against her had come to see William Morrison for what he was, an outsider trying to steal what wasn't his. Clara Morrison Wade has been nothing but a credit to our community, Mrs. Patterson testified. The same woman who'd once led the gossip against her. She's worked that land with her own hands, helped neighbors in need, and shown more courage than most men I know. One by one, they came forward. The blacksmith spoke of how Clara had nursed his wife through a difficult childbirth. The schoolteacher mentioned Clara's donations of books when the schools had been destroyed in a flood. Even Josiah Hartwell, under oath and clearly uncomfortable, admitted he'd found no legal irregularities in Thomas's will. He'd simply been hoping to pressure a sale. But the most powerful moment came when Clara herself took the stand. Mrs. Wade, William's lead attorney began, his tone patronizing. Isn't it true you married your current husband mere months after your first husband's tragic death? Yes, Clara said simply. And isn't it true that Mr. Wade had been, shall we say, circling your property even before your period of mourning was complete? Mr. Wade came to Dry Creek looking for land. Yes, he made no secret of that. Yet you married him with unseemly haste. Some might say you were simply transferring your property to a man more capable of defending it. Using feminine wiles to— Sir, Clara interrupted, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. I married Cole Wade because in a land where women are seen as property themselves, it was the only way to protect what my first husband left me. But if you're asking whether I used feminine wiles, I assure you, I used something far more powerful. And what was that? Clara looked directly at the judge. The truth. I told Cole exactly what I needed. A partner to help me keep what was mine. He agreed to a business arrangement. That it became more than that. That we found love where we expected only cooperation. Is neither illegal nor immoral. It's human. She turned back to the attorney. You speak of my unseemly haste, but where were such concerns when Mr. William Morrison arrived to claim property that was never his? Where was the seemly behavior when my barn was burned, destroying the very documents that proved my claim? Where was the propriety when hired thugs attacked my home in the dead of night? Your Honor, the attorney protested. These allegations are unsubstantiated? Then let me substantiate them. A new voice called from the gallery. Everyone turned to see a stranger rising from the back row. He was young, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to authority. Your Honor, my name is James Pinkerton, of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. I've been investigating Mr. William Morrison for several months at the request of other interested parties. The courtroom erupted in whispers. William's face had gone pale as parchment. Judge Coleman, a fair man with piercing eyes, gestured for order. Mr. Pinkerton, this is highly irregular. Do you have evidence relevant to this case? I do, Your Honor. Evidence that Mr. Morrison has been systematically attempting to defraud multiple widows across 3 territories, using forged documents and intimidation to steal their inherited property. Pinkerton produced a leather case filled with documents, testimonies, and sworn statements. The evidence was damning. William had left a trail of destroyed lives from Kansas to California, always targeting vulnerable women, always claiming kinship that didn't exist or was too distant to matter. "This is preposterous," William shouted, jumping to his feet. "I am Thomas Morrison's rightful heir. That woman bewitched him, turned him against his own blood." But his lawyers were already backing away, recognizing a lost cause when they saw one. The judge reviewed the documents with growing disgust. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Coleman said finally, "not only is your claim dismissed with prejudice, but I'm ordering your immediate arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft. Marshal, take him into custody." As William was dragged away, still screaming about his rights, Clara felt Cole's hand slip into hers. She gripped it like an anchor in a storm. The judge addressed the courtroom. "Let this be clear to all who would prey upon the vulnerable. The law protects everyone, man or woman, widow or wife. Mrs. Morrison Wade's property is hers by right of inheritance and marriage. Any further attempts to challenge this will be met with the full force of the law." Outside the courthouse, snow was falling softly, transforming the world into something clean and new. Clara stood with Cole, surrounded by their neighbors who'd made the journey to support them. Even Murphy offered awkward congratulations. "Guess I had you figured wrong, Mrs. Wade," he mumbled. "Morrison Wade." Clara corrected one last time, then smiled. "But thank you, Mr. Murphy." James Pinkerton approached as the crowd dispersed. "Mrs. Morrison Wade. Mr. Wade. I should tell you, William Morrison wasn't working alone. There's a whole ring of these vultures, targeting widows across the territories. Your case, your courage in fighting back, it's helped us break them up." "Who hired you?" Cole asked. Pinkerton smiled slightly. "Let's just say there are people in high places who don't like seeing war widows and mining widows robbed of their rightful inheritance. Your story reached the right ears." He tipped his hat and disappeared into the swirling snow, leaving them standing together in wonder. "It's over," Clara breathed. "It's really over? This part is." Cole agreed, pulling her close. "But our story, that's just beginning." The journey home took 2 days through the snow. They stopped at the same inn where they'd stayed on the way to Prescott. But this time, there was no awkwardness, no careful distance. They were truly husband and wife now, united by trials that had forged them stronger than any marriage vows could. When they finally crested the ridge overlooking their valley, Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. Home, their home, fought for and won, bought with courage and sealed with love. But the biggest surprise waited at the ranch. A crew of men was already at work rebuilding the barn, directed by an unlikely foreman, Sheriff Watson himself. "Figured you'd need this come spring," Watson said gruffly. "Town took up a collection. Even Hartwell contributed, though I suspect that was guilt more than generosity." Clara looked around at the workers, neighbors who'd whispered, men who'd doubted, women who'd judged, all here now, helping rebuild what hatred had destroyed. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "Don't say anything, Mrs. Patterson advised, handing her a cup of hot coffee. "Just know that we see you now, really see you, and we're sorry it took so long." That night, as Clara and Cole sat by their fire, watching the snow fall outside their window, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first wary meeting in Murphy's store to this moment of perfect peace. It had been a road marked by loss and fear, violence and redemption. "Penny for your thoughts," Cole said, stroking her hair. "I was thinking about Thomas." Clara said honestly, "I think he would be happy, not just that I kept the land, but that I found love again. He always wanted me to be happy." "He was a good man to love you," Cole said simply. "I'm grateful to him for that." Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become her everything. "You took the widow for land," she said, echoing their old joke. "But my touch claimed your heart, and what a claiming it was," Cole murmured, kissing her softly. "Best ambush I ever rode into." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their land in pristine white. But inside, warmed by fire and love. Clara Morrison Wade knew she was exactly where she belonged. The fight was won. The land was theirs. And most importantly, they had each other. The widow and the cowboy, united against all odds. Proof that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't measured in acres or gold, but in the courage to trust, the strength to fight, and the wisdom to know when you found something worth keeping forever. Spring arrived like a blessing over the Morrison Wade ranch, painting the desert in unexpected colors. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows where their cattle grazed, and the new barn stood proud against the azure sky, a symbol of community and redemption. Clara stood on the porch, one hand resting on her slowly rounding belly, watching Cole work with a young colt in the corral. The news of her pregnancy had come just after the new year, filling their home with a joy that seemed to make the very walls sing. "Easy there, little one," Cole murmured to the horse, his voice carrying on the morning breeze. "Trust takes time, but it's worth the wait." Clara smiled, knowing he spoke from experience. Their own trust had been hard-won, built through fire and trial, and was now unshakable as the mountains that ringed their valley. "Mrs. Wade." Young Timothy Patterson came racing up the drive, waving a letter. "Mail from town." Clara accepted the envelope. Recognizing Mary Daniel's careful script, the young woman wrote regularly now, sharing news of her new life in San Francisco, where she'd opened a small secretarial school for women. "Your courage inspired me." Mary had written, "If you could stand up to the whole world for what was yours, I could certainly stand up for my own dreams." Cole joined her on the porch, reading over her shoulder. "She's doing well. She found her strength." Clara said, "Just like we did." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, hands resting protectively over where their child grew. "Speaking of strength, how are you feeling this morning?" "Like I could conquer the world," Clara laughed. "Or at least get that vegetable garden planted." They worked together through the morning, preparing the soil that had once seemed so unforgiving but now yielded to their combined efforts. The ranch was thriving, their cattle healthy, their horses sought after, their reputation solid as bedrock. "Remember when you first came here?" Clara asked, pausing to wipe sweat from her brow. "I thought you were just another vulture, circling for opportunity." "I was," Cole admitted, "but I found something worth more than land." "Oh? And what's that?" He pulled her close, mindless of the dirt on their clothes. "A partner, a woman who could shoot straight, fight fair, and love fierce. Everything a man could want." "Flatterer," she accused, but kissed him anyway. As noon approached, they saw riders coming, but these brought no fear. Sheriff Watson had become a regular visitor, often bringing his wife for Sunday dinners. Today he brought news from town. "Thought you'd want to know," he said, accepting a glass of cool water. "That Pinkerton fellow was right about the ring of swindlers. They've arrested 12 men across 3 territories. Your case broke it wide open." "Any word on William Morrison?" Cole asked. 20 years hard labor. He won't be troubling any more widows." Watson's expression grew thoughtful. "You two did a good thing, standing up to him. Gave a lot of folks courage to fight their own battles." After Watson left, Clara and Cole walked their property line, checking fences and planning improvements. The land that had once seemed like a burden now felt like a gift, each acre a testament to their perseverance. "I've been thinking," Cole said as they paused by the creek. That northern section would be perfect for a school. Communities growing. Children need proper education. Clara looked at him in surprise. "You'd give up land for a school?" "Not give up. Invest. In the future. In our children's future." He touched her belly gently. "This little one deserves every chance. Have I told you today that I love you?" Only 3 times. I was starting to worry. They laughed, the sound carrying across their land like a benediction. In the distance, their new barn caught the afternoon light, its red walls a bright spot in the landscape. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Clara felt a flutter in her belly, the first movement of their child. She gasped, reaching for Cole's hand. "What is it? Are you—" "Feel." She placed his hand where the movement had been. They waited, breathless, until it came again. A tiny kick, a declaration of life. Cole's eyes widened with wonder. "Our baby? Our future?" Clara corrected softly. As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, they sat on their porch, the same porch where Clara had once stood alone, defending her solitary kingdom. Now it was their sanctuary, their watchtower over a life built together. "I used to sit here," Clara said quietly. "After Thomas died, I thought my life was over. Thought all I had left was holding on to this land until I couldn't anymore. And now," she turned to him, seeing in his weathered face all the love and strength that had carried them through. "Now I know this land was never the real treasure. It was just the keeper of it until the real treasure arrived, the cowboy who took the widow for land." Cole quoted with a self-deprecating smile, but her touch claimed his heart. Clara finished, "The best trade ever made." As full dark settled over the ranch, they could hear the cattle lowing peacefully, the horses nickering in their stalls. Inside the house, a fire crackled warmly, waiting for them. But for now, they were content to sit together, watching the stars emerge one by one, each a bright promise in the vast Arizona sky. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked, his voice a rumble in the darkness. "That we've come so far from that day in Murphy's store, that every hardship led us here, to this perfect moment." "Nothing's perfect," Cole said pragmatically, but his arm tightened around her. "This is," Clara insisted, "this moment, this life, this love, it's perfectly imperfect, and it's ours." In the months to come, their child would be born, a daughter with Clara's spirit and Cole's eyes. The school would be built, bringing families and growth to their corner of the territory. There would be droughts and floods, good years and lean ones. But through it all, they would stand together, united by a love that had grown from the harsh soil of necessity into something beautiful and enduring. But tonight, in the gentle darkness of an Arizona spring, they simply held each other and counted their blessings. The widow who'd thought she had nothing left to give had found her heart could love again. The cowboy who'd come seeking land had discovered a home. Together, they'd built something that would last far longer than any deed or document, a legacy of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that sometimes the best things come from the most unlikely beginnings. "Forever?" Clara asked, echoing a promise made in darker days. "Forever and then some," Cole confirmed, sealing it with a kiss under the vast, approving sky. The stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses to their triumph, and somewhere in the desert, a coyote howled, not lonely this time, but calling to its mate, a wild song of belonging that echoed the joy in 2 united hearts. The land endured, as it always had. But now it sheltered not just memories and hopes, but a living love that would nurture generations to come. The cowboy had taken the widow for land, but in the end, they'd both gained something far more precious, each other, and a future bright with promise under the endless Arizona sky. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Cole's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening to this story from? I'd love to know. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow Western romance lovers from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, love, and adventure from the American frontier. What did you think of Clara and Cole's story? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment and would love to hear from you.